Welcome back. Aurelius and Malik. The Conflict Archive. We close the American Civil War file today. 5 parts. The end of the story. The South awoke in the spring of 1865 to silence and ruin. Years of war had left cities burned to their foundations, fields scarred and lifeless. This wasn't merely a military defeat. It was a social collapse. Families searched through the ashes, looking for anything to survive. Only the wind moved, whispering over blackened fields, a haunting reminder of what had been.
You paint a bleak picture, Aurelius, but we must remember the human cost. The despair wasn't simply about lost battles. It was about the hunger and exhaustion of those families, the mothers and children who were left to pick up the pieces. The South's ruin was not just physical. It was emotional. It's essential to highlight the personal stories behind those blackened fields.
Sherman's march to the sea epitomized that destruction. It was a calculated strategy aimed at breaking the will of the South. Rail lines twisted and contorted, crops were set ablaze, and entire cities were left in smoldering ruins. This wasn't merely about military tactics. It was psychological warfare at its finest. The Union recognized something crucial. To win a war, you must first dismantle the enemy's spirit. It's a lesson in how power operates, and we see it replayed throughout history.
But what about the collateral damage? The people caught in that march were not soldiers. They were families. Yes, it was strategy, but it wreaked havoc on innocent lives. The devastation had lasting impacts on communities that had nothing to do with the decision to go to war. It's not just about tactics. It's about the lives that were irreparably changed.
In Richmond, the heart of the Confederacy, bread lines stretched down muddy streets, a grim reminder of what this war had wrought. The city, once proud, had become a symbol of defeat. Children peered from behind tattered blankets, their faces thin and drawn, eyes reflecting a haunting emptiness. This stark reality was the aftermath of a conflict fought for lofty ideals. So, what had those ideals brought them? Only hunger, despair, and a sense of loss that lingered in the air like smoke.
And let's not forget the women and children who bore the brunt of this suffering. While men fought, it was often the women who held communities together, scavenging for food and resources. Their resilience is a story lost in the grand narratives of battles and generals. It's critical to recognize their struggle amidst the ruins. They were the unseen heroes of this war.
The siege at Petersburg marked the beginning of the end. Grant's relentless attacks wore down Lee's men, day after day. It was a war of attrition, grinding away the last vestiges of hope. On April 2nd, the Union finally broke through. The sound of cannon fire signaled not just victory, but the collapse of an entire way of life.
The very day Richmond fell, it wasn't just military defeat. It was the destruction of hope. Confederate officials set their own city ablaze, a desperate act of defiance. In that moment, they surrendered not just to the Union, but to the futility of their cause. The chaos they unleashed on their own people speaks volumes about the desperation and fear that gripped them.
Then came Appomattox. On April 9th, Lee and Grant met shower. A dignified Lee faced a mud-spattered Grant. It was a moment of resignation. The war thundered to a halt, but the silence that followed was heavy with grief. 620,000 dead. Empty chairs at every table. The cost of this conflict was unimaginable.
But what about the living? The aftermath was as painful as the war itself. Emancipation brought freedom, yes, but it stripped away any sense of security for the newly freed. They faced violence from those who could not accept change. The shadows of Confederate guerrillas haunted their every step. This was not just the end of the war. It was the beginning of a new struggle.
Reconstruction began amidst this turmoil. Union soldiers patrolled the ruins, their presence a reminder of the war's aftermath. Congress was embroiled in fierce debates over the nation's future. New laws were drafted, challenged, and fought over. The wounds of war ran deep, dividing families and friends. It was a political battleground as fierce as the military one.
And what of the legacy we left behind? The new rights promised were often met with violent resistance. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan emerged from the shadows to terrorize those who dared to claim their freedom. The struggle for true equality continued in the face of this violence. Reconstruction was a time of hope, but also of fear and oppression.
Yet from these ashes, something new was born. The United States emerged, now forever, indivisible. The abolition of slavery was a monumental step, but the journey towards justice was far from over. The Civil War was a test of ideals, one that left scars, but also paved the way for a different future. The cost of liberty will forever echo through history.
And that closes the American Civil War file. 5 parts. One complete story. The full series lives on the Conflict Archive, part of the Archive Network. There's no shortage of files. Browse what pulls at you next.